Many great cities of the world are known for their style, others their history, culture or glamour. But there's only one that truly possesses all of these qualities and much, much more besides. We are of course talking about Paris, the romantic city of light, and visitors, even on a short break, are guaranteed an unforgettable experience. One of the most distinctive features of Paris is the beautiful River Seine that runs right through the city. Some of the most popular tours for visitors are enjoyed by boat. This is a great way to see the sights, as traffic on the roads of Paris can be chaotic to say the least. A brief sojourn watching vehicles attempting to navigate the Arc de Triomphe will prove enlightening, and definitely more entertaining as a spectator sport. Alternatively, the Paris metro is a very efficient way to get from place to place, but of course you won't get to see a great deal while you're travelling, as you would aboard one of the city's world-famous bateaux. Getting to see as much of Paris as you possibly can may therefore seem fairly straightforward. But be warned, there are a great many distractions along the way. The tempting array of street cafes where native Parisians elegantly sit and watch the world go by are an important part of the city's culture, and it's all too easy to get a taste for the delicious coffee and spectacular patisserie on offer. If you have leisurely hours at your disposal, this is a wonderful way to pass the time. However, on a weekend break, you'll need to take a rather more disciplined approach, with so many iconic landmarks just waiting to be discovered. So, without further ado, it's time to make a start on our tour of Paris, beginning at a location that is not only the true geographical heart of the city, but also the whole of France. The huge Gothic splendour of the Cathedral of Notre-Dame can be found where all distances are measured from Paris to every other French destination. Even at first glance, you can see why Notre-Dame was the obvious choice for this national distinction. And it's worth looking out for the bronze star set in the pavement on the Place de Parvis Notre-Dame, which marks Point Zero, making this a fitting place to start our journey around Paris. Looking upwards from Point Zero, directly opposite the main entrance to Notre-Dame, you get a real sense of the grandeur and significance of this cathedral, and the importance of it to the people of Paris, since Pope Alexander III laid the first stone in the 12th century. The two towers of the west front lead your eyes heavenwards, just as the early stonemasons intended, and it must indeed have been a labour of love, because the project took 170 years to complete. Take a close look at the statues from this viewpoint, and you'll see why this cathedral took so long, because the quality and detail is nothing short of awe-inspiring. There are 3 main doors and a beautiful rose window, but the same can't be said of the gargoyles that stare out from the upper gallery. Traditionally, gargoyles were employed to ward off evil spirits, and these particular examples are grotesque enough to do the job very well indeed, and younger visitors to the cathedral will be absolutely delighted with them. If, while visiting, you're fortunate enough to hear the great Emmanuel bell ringing out, it's actually housed within the South Tower. And while we're on the subject of the bells of Notre-Dame, one of the major contributors to the fame of this cathedral has to be the novel by Victor Hugo entitled The Hunchback of Notre-Dame, and its eponymous hero, the bell ringer, Quasimodo. Published in 1831, the novel definitely rekindled interest in the cathedral, which, surprising as it may sound, looking at the beautiful architecture today, had fallen into a poor state of repair. Despite playing a key role in many of the nation's historic events, kings of France were crowned here and queens of France married. By the time the 19th century dawned, Notre-Dame was crumbling. During the French Revolution of the 1790s, the cathedral was looted, and even when Napoleon crowned himself Emperor of France here in 1804, the crumbling walls had to be disguised with rich tapestries. A full restoration programme began in 1845, which included the building of a spire by the architect Eugène Viollet-le-Duc, who was also responsible for the gargoyles we saw earlier. Other features not to be missed at Notre Dame are the wonderful flying buttresses, which have an incredible span of 15 metres. Their very presence here tells you that the stained glass windows in the cathedral are going to be spectacular, and the south rose window, measuring some 13 metres in height, will never fail to impress. This is because, with the strength of the flying buttresses, the craftsmen responsible for the construction were less constrained by the demands of uninterrupted brick for supporting walls. This district of Paris is known as the Ile de la Cite, and joined by the Pont Saint-Louis to a smaller island, you can certainly see why it was so named. Now, without doubt, Notre Dame is the most famous attraction here, but it's also well worth looking out for the building known as the Conciergerie, which occupies the westerly tip of the island, and will take you back in time to an age when there was a much darker side to the character of this light, bright, beautiful city. Although today the Conciergerie is an extremely popular tourist attraction, in days gone by, this was one of the city's largest and most notorious prisons, and there's even an 11th century torture chamber which people can walk around if they're feeling brave enough. Occupying part of what was once a royal palace, the Conciergerie became a jail after the then king moved his household elsewhere in the 15th century. However, it was centuries later, the 18th to be precise, when this prison really came to prominence. During the French Revolution, more than 4,000 prisoners were detained here, many of them sent to the guillotine, including Queen Marie Antoinette, who was kept in a tiny cell before being executed in 1793. One of the greatest joys of visiting Paris is the fact that so many of the major attractions can be found in a fairly compact area, and you can, quite literally, step from this city's eventful past to the cutting-edge style of the present, and in a matter of moments. Travelling a mere 100 metres north of the Conciergerie, the view that you'll be afforded has to be seen to be believed, because the building known as the Pompidou Centre is absolutely unique. Built in 1977, it's a marvel of modern architecture that is already resolutely standing the test of time. Situated just a stone's throw from the River Seine, the structure is a centre for the arts, both inside and out. With an intriguing and visually challenging exoskeleton, the Pompidou Centre houses a vast public library, the National Museum of Modern Art, a centre for music and acoustic research, cinema, music hall, bookshops and cafés. The designers were able to utilise the interior to maximum capacity, because so much of what makes the building tick is actually located outside. In fact, those less keen on the design have described it as looking as if there's scaffolding all over the centre, which the builders forgot to take away. However, look a little closer, and you'll see that the massive tubes and pipes would normally be hidden away on the inside. Usually the supports, air ducts, lifts and escalators would all be interior fixtures. But the architects, Richard Rogers and Renzo Piano, turned this notion on its head, or, if you'll excuse the pun, inside out. Even today, this building, with its steel edges jutting out dramatically, remains one of the most polemic buildings in all of France. As controversial as ever, of the 6 million visitors who pass through the centre's doors every year, opinion is still as divided as ever. There's one thing that is absolute certainty though. The Pompidou Centre, named after the equally flamboyant former French president, will always be a talking point, generating all manner of responses. One of the centre's most striking features is the snake-like escalator that can be seen climbing up the building. The moving stairway, complete with its plastic roof, gives visitors a memorable experience with a view from the top that will not be forgotten in a hurry. And despite the architecture of the Pompidou Centre being an acquired taste, it's nevertheless a very interesting place to pass the time. And while we're on the subject of time, without departing too far from the topic of modernity, it's well worth searching out an amazing timepiece in the Quartier l'Horloge, which literally translates as the clock quarter. Here, visitors will discover this remarkable masterpiece by one of the city's greatest contemporary sculptors, Jacques Monestier. Called Le Défenseur du Temps, the Defender of Time in English, this is very definitely a clock with a difference. Standing 4 meters tall, the clock truly is an incredible public sculpture in polished hammered brass, and a further example of more contemporary Parisian style. Jacques Monestier has long been at the forefront of automated robotic sculptures, and this magnificent clock from 1979 is without doubt way ahead of its time. As fascinating as all this modernist architecture and sculpture might be, it's just possible that by now you may be hankering after something a little more traditionally Parisian in style. But once again, you don't have to walk very far to see a different side of this beautiful city, and the Rue Quincampoix proves the point beyond question, immediately transporting visitors back to the elegance of bygone Paris. Here you'll find the perfect balance of beautifully restored original 18th century hotels, cosy cafes to hide away in, and also a number of very contemporary art galleries. Fortunately, many of the streets in this area have been pedestrianised, so you can walk along the narrow lanes at your leisure without having to dive out of the path of oncoming traffic, making this a really wonderful part of Paris in which to unwind and soak up the unmistakably continental atmosphere. While we're on the subject of Parisian style, there are many examples to be found of the daring mixing of classical architecture and the shock of the new. Where other nations would never dare, The French, and the Parisians in particular, have embraced the past, present and future in order to keep their capital city alive, moving with the times, but never losing sight of their history. However, when you come to Paris, the most dramatic evidence you will find of this less than conventional approach to municipal building has to be the magnificent Palace of the Louvre. Originally constructed as a fortress by King Philippe Auguste in 1190 to protect Paris from Viking raids, successive monarchs added to the mix. And when Napoleon declared himself Emperor of France in 1804, he also made his mark on this palace. Look out for the beautiful Arc de Triomphe du Carrousel, which was built in 1805 to celebrate Napoleon's most famous military victories. Even so, despite the elegant architectural splendour of a long past age, for most people, when the Louvre is mentioned, the first thing they'll think of is the great glass pyramid that stands at the main entrance to the museum. The iconic structure, designed by I.M. Pei, was completed in 1989 and really brought the Louvre into the modern age as pace gathered towards a new millennium. By using glass, the architect's intention was to enable those who come here to still see the historic buildings that surround the pyramid, while flooding light down into an underground reception area. It would certainly appear that he achieved his goal, and today thousands of visitors flock daily to the Louvre, where some of the world's best-loved works of art, including the Venus de Milo and the museum's most viewed exhibit, Leonardo da Vinci's portrait of the Mona Lisa, are on display. It's interesting to note that since the phenomenal success of Dan Brown's novel The Da Vinci Code, which opens with a gruesome murder in the Louvre, the museum, like many other Paris locations featured in the book, has become a key place to visit for tourists on the Da Vinci Code trail. This really is a delightful part of Paris, and after experiencing so much history and culture, a pleasant stroll or time to sit and quietly reflect on what's been seen in a lovely garden is the perfect way to continue our tour. And on exiting the Louvre, the Jardin des Tuileries stretch out parallel to the River Seine to make up an integral part of the landscaping that runs all the way to the Champs-Élysées and the Arc de Triomphe. Up until 1871, the Tuileries Palace that stood here was very grand, before it was destroyed by fire. And now only the name of the gardens remains as a reminder of yet another elegant example of great Parisian architecture. In spring and summer, the formal flower beds are beautiful, but whatever time of year you come, be sure to look out for the fascinating bronze sculptures that can be found here. The area creates a wonderful backdrop to the Louvre, and with gardens like these accessible to everyone, it's no wonder Paris is considered to be such a romantic city. But as well as being a city of romance, there have also been some very dark periods in the history of Paris. And our next destination, the Place de la Concorde, has certainly seen more than its fair share of bloodshed down through the ages. The impressive open octagon, with only one side graced by fine mansions, was originally laid out as Place Louis XV, complete with a statue of the eponymous monarch in the mid-18th century. It was definitely an opulent sign of the times when French royalty and the aristocracy lived a decadent life of luxury, while the poor struggled for survival. It was a recipe for disaster, and when, on the 14th of July 1789, the Bastille prison was stormed by revolutionaries, it was the start of one of the city's bloodiest chapters, and would result in more than 60,000 people losing their lives, or more specifically, their heads. After the storming of the Bastille, the statue that stood here of Louis XV was, needless to say, removed and replaced by the notorious guillotine, and this quickly became the Place de la Révolution. Louis XVI was guillotined here, as was his wife, Queen Marie Antoinette, and so were many others, no more than suspected of betraying the revolution, who were executed without trial. It's hard to believe today that this beautiful Parisian square once ran thick with the blood of its own people. But after the revolution, in a spirit of reconciliation, it was renamed once again as the Place de la Concorde. The magnificent Egyptian obelisk brought here from Luxor, dating back more than 3,000 years, was put in place in the 19th century, and being of no political significance, it was hoped that it would never be used as a symbol for any cause that might threaten the streets of Paris again. Moving on from the Place de la Concorde with its gruesome history, we come to the Champs-Élysées, complete with its own equally fascinating past. The Champs-Élysées is without doubt one of the world's most beautiful streets, and as this elegant tree-lined broad avenue sweeps you along, it's not difficult to see why it's also called La plus belle avenue du monde, which translates as the most beautiful avenue in the world. And just as you might expect, as well as being delightfully attractive with its fine restaurants, shops and cinemas, it's also become an extremely exclusive place to see and to be seen. To rent a property of any description on the Champs-Élysées will set you back a great deal financially, and only New York's Fifth Avenue would cost you more. These astronomical prices, however, have given this avenue a style and grace that really has to be experienced to be appreciated. And even if you can only afford to window shop at the many designer stores you'll find here, it's a great way to spend some time on any tour of Paris. Interestingly, the Champs-Élysées dates back to about 1667, when it developed as a popular tree-lined avenue where people could travel through the delightful formal gardens, landscaped as part of an extended royal view from the Tuileries Palace. It also became known as the Triumphal Way, after Napoleon's body was brought via this route from St. Helena, some 19 years after his death, to his final resting place in the Dome Church, Les Invalides. And should you be in the mood for an evening stroll, while we're on the subject of Napoleon, if you walk from one end of the Champs-Élysées to the other, you can't miss the most spectacular monument in Paris, commemorating the French emperor, who aspired to become king of the world. Standing 50 metres high, the Arc de Triomphe dominates the area, and anyone who climbs to the viewing platform at the top will get a fabulous view of this part of the city. There are actually 12 avenues, which radiate out from the mighty arch, and watching the traffic negotiating what is in effect a monumental roundabout can be absolutely fascinating. The first stone of this triumphal arch was laid upon Napoleon's orders after his victory at the Battle of Austerlitz in 1805. He'd promised his soldiers that they would go home beneath triumphal arches, and when it came to his army, Napoleon was a man of his word. Unfortunately for the French emperor, his military might was soon on the wane, and it actually took more than 30 years for the project to be completed. You'll see various friezes depicting Napoleon's famous victories. But it's not only the Napoleonic Wars that are remembered here. At the centre of the arch, you'll find the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, honouring all those who died for France in the First World War. At 6:30 every evening, the flame is lit above the tomb as a mark of respect, and it's said that even during the German occupation of France in the Second World War, the flame continued to burn. The archive footage available from this terrible period in French history is certainly chilling, especially when you watch the Nazi troops marching into Paris through the Arc de Triomphe. In fact, when the city was liberated by the Allies in 1944, President de Gaulle led the celebrating French crowds from this landmark, but it was fortunate indeed that the Arc was left standing. When Adolf Hitler marched on Paris in 1940, it had been his intention to burn Paris to the ground and rebuild it to his own notion of classic Teutonic architecture. But the fate smiled on Paris when he transferred his plans for municipal development to Berlin instead, and today visitors to this beautiful city can still enjoy the Arc de Triomphe exactly as had first been intended. That said, Paris is also famous for not only moving with the times, but also shaping culture with far-reaching consequences all over the world. The Paris-based artists of the 19th century Impressionist movement are a case in point. And if you want to see their beautiful paintings, our next destination, the Musée d'Orsay, is without doubt the best setting in which to view the works of Renoir, Monet, Manet, Degas, and many more besides. To get to the Musée d'Orsay, we need to cross to the left bank of the River Seine, which has long been associated with artists, poets, philosophers, and radical thinkers. However, this truly remarkable museum was not always so in keeping with the intellectual nature of the left bank, because it started out at the turn of the 20th century as a much more functional construction, namely a railway station. Nevertheless, it's hard to believe today, looking at this beautiful Parisian landmark, that it was almost demolished in the 1970s because it had fallen into a terrible state of repair. Fortunately, much of the original architecture was retained in the restoration project, flooding the building with light, and there could be no more appropriate home for the work of the Impressionists, the true painters of light. It's worth allowing yourself plenty of time at the Musée d'Orsay, and when you've had your fill of tranquil culture, at least you won't have to travel far to find our next destination, the Hôtel des Cendres, because it's located right next door. The building is also known as the Palais Légion d'Honneur and is in fact a prestigious museum where it's possible to learn about the French Legion of Honor, a decoration instigated by Napoleon that's still cherished to this day. With its green dome and wonderfully rounded front, it's impossible to walk past this building without pausing to consider the glorious architecture. The grand exterior is adorned with wonderful sculptures and friezes, while inside the museum it's just as impressive, especially if you're interested in military history, when making a stop here will be essential. But fear not. Should you have had your fill of museums by this point on your tour, you can find just as much enjoyment wandering the historic streets of this fascinating district. In fact, this is one of the reasons why Paris is so enchanting, because so many of the streets that you just stumble upon are treasure troves of culture and history in their own right, and the Quai Voltaire is a fine example. Following the line of the Seine, this street is home to some wonderful 18th century houses, and many of the finest antique dealers in Paris. As you enjoy a leisurely walk along the Quai Voltaire today, it only takes a little imagination to picture the much-loved artists of the past, like the composer Richard Wagner, sculptor James Pradier, and novelist Charles Baudelaire, who were all once in residence here. The atmosphere must have been truly remarkable when so many artists and writers lived almost side by side in this area, and no doubt this contributed to their great works. Those days may be long gone, but a stroll through Quai Voltaire, with its wonderful architecture and inviting establishments, will evoke a true sense of the historic artistic heritage of cultural Paris. Now, it may come as a surprise that we've been exploring Paris for some considerable time without visiting the city's most iconic attraction. There's little doubt that if someone asked you to picture Paris in your mind, your first thought would be of the Eiffel Tower. And when you actually see this elegant construction, you will immediately understand why. Situated about a kilometre west of Quai Voltaire, the Eiffel Tower presides over the River Seine and dominates the Parisian skyline. But it isn't only the tower itself that's spectacular, because this is a splendid district of Paris where the Eiffel Tower, not surprisingly, takes pride of place. One of the many wonderful aspects of the Eiffel Tower is that no matter how many times you have seen it in books, films and posters, when you actually get to see it in person, it'll still exceed your expectations with its beauty and grace. At over 1,000 feet in height, the tower was the tallest building in the entire world, until New York's Empire State Building took that title in 1931. Of course, there are now many taller and grander structures all over the world, but when you remember that this tower was created in 1889, the design concept of its creator, Gustave Eiffel, and the engineering skill required to bring his dream to fruition can only be described as astonishing. Forever a symbol of Paris all over the world, it's incredible to think that a 19th century structure of iron and rivets can still have such a mesmerizing effect on the senses, as each new generation discovers the unique experience that is the Eiffel Tower. By night, the Eiffel Tower is a truly glorious sight, but if visiting by day, it's well worth taking the time to wander through the Parc du Champ de Mars that stretches away from the tower like a regally rolled out carpet. The gardens may not be the most picturesque in Paris, but if you've just climbed many hundreds of steps, then this is a wonderful place to take a breather upon your descent, where you can look up at the Eiffel Tower and marvel at where you've just been. And a gentle stroll through the gardens will actually take us to our next location, situated at the end of the Parc du Champ de Mars, the École Militaire. Today, this huge building, which dominates the gardens at this point, is framed by the glass panels that create the Peace Monument on the edge of the Champ de Mars. The word peace, written in many languages on the monument's panels and columns, is somewhat ironic given the role of the École Militaire, a military school founded by Louis XV in 1750. The aim was specifically to help cadet officers from poor families to embark upon a military career. But this idealistic vision didn't last long, and all too soon it was utilised for the training of aristocratic army officers, no doubt adding fuel to the fire of the revolution, already smouldering. Even so, the most notable graduate was, of course, Napoleon Bonaparte. And it's interesting to note that this area where the French emperor began his rise to power is also where he eventually ended up being laid to rest. Situated just to the east of the École Militaire is another huge complex that makes up Les Invalides. You can't mistake the buildings, not least because of the stunning gold-covered dome of the church that demands your attention. Even on a dull and grey day, the wonderful glittering gilding lights up the sky like a replacement sun, and the Église du Don is always a beautiful sight to behold. And this is where you'll find the tomb of Napoleon. His remains have been at rest in this exquisite domed church since December the 14th, 1840, when they were paraded through the streets of Paris and under the Arc de Triomphe before finally reaching the Église du Don. Napoleon had actually died in exile on the island of St. Helena in 1821, so it took almost 20 years for his restoration to the city, which, for a time at least, he made the capital of his empire. The domed church really has to be one of the most magnificent places to be laid to rest. And with such an ornate tomb contained within the grandiose pillars and columns, surely Napoleon, as one of the world's most respected military tacticians of all time, would have heartily approved. One of the biggest difficulties you'll encounter while visiting Paris, and in truth, it's the most positive downside you'll ever come across, is how to find the time to see all of this city's wonderful treasures. And the same is true of this programme. So we must leave the beautiful Les Invalides and head away from central Paris to a district just a little further out. Welcome to Montmartre, the area of Paris most closely associated with artists and street painters, which always features very highly on everyone's list of attractions to see in this great city. It's actually very easy to get here, courtesy of the metro. But should you have the time at your disposal, the walk, which is about 3 kilometres from the centre of Paris, is an absolute delight. And you'll get a real feel of Parisian life that you'd never find on the usual tourist trails. Nestled on the very edge of central northern Paris, Montmartre sits on a steep hill that sweeps elegantly down to the metropolis and watches over the beautiful City of Light. Immediately obvious is the completely different atmosphere to the rest of Paris, not least, as you can see for yourself, because the ground isn't sufficiently stable to allow for new building projects. Consequently, much of the district's old worldly charm and rather ramshackle architecture has been left undisturbed, which is very good news indeed. However, this area did have a far from salubrious reputation in the past, where many unsavoury characters were known to congregate, frequenting red light districts, and it was also home to large numbers of the city's poor. As a result, Montmartre became home to young poverty-stricken artists who were drawn to Paris to ply their trade, many of whom went on to become world famous, including the likes of Salvador Dali, Vincent van Gogh and Pablo Picasso, to mention but a few. As they became acclaimed, so did the area of Paris where they lived, and soon the district was buzzing with an artistic energy that lives on to this day. Today, as you stroll through the charming streets and squares, you'll find galleries and museums dedicated to the artists that once painted here, such as the Dali Museum, which stands at the very heart of Montmartre. Dedicated to the eponymous 20th century genius, you'll find no less than 330 original engravings and sculptures by Salvador Dali on display, offering an extraordinary journey through the artist's surreal universe. Without doubt, Montmartre is one of the most popular tourist spots in Paris, and you can't help but be won over by its charisma, embodied, not least, by a very special square just a stone's throw from the Dali Museum. The Place du Tertre, a real Parisian high point, is famed for its association with the artists who began exhibiting here well over a century ago. Awash with interesting little cafés and crêperies, you'll find it full of budding artists, even when the weather's bad, ready and willing to capture your likeness for the right price. They may not be the next grand masters, but what better way to remember your travels than with your very own portrait by a Parisian artist? The artists and rather bohemian atmosphere may well be what attracts so many people to Montmartre, but there's a wonderful added bonus in store, and it also happens to be a Parisian sight that if you come here, you can't fail to see. This magnificent basilica is the Sacré-Cœur, dedicated to the Sacred Heart of Christ, and the white-domed extravaganza, considered to be one of France's most important Roman Catholic churches, can be found at the summit of Montmartre. As a result of the advantageous location, the Sacré-Cœur can be seen from all over Paris, and from this spot, the entire city will be laid out in front of you, giving as good a view of Paris as you'll see from the Eiffel Tower. In fact, considering the dome is actually the second highest point in Paris after the tower, this won't come as too much of a surprise. The origins of the Sacré-Cœur are as fascinating as the building itself, and what it perhaps lacks in grace, it definitely makes up for in spectacle. Work began here in 1875 after two businessmen promised to build the basilica if France was spared from assault during the Franco-Prussian War, and as this is precisely what happened, they were true to their word. If you go down into the crypt vaults, the heart of one of them, Alexandre Leguntel, has been preserved in a stone urn. Perhaps on a higher level, the beautiful stained glass gallery located just below the dome seems to be far more appealing to the thousands of visitors who come here. Other treasures to look out for are the huge bronze doors which show the Last Supper, and the elegant bell tower that completes this truly inspirational picture. Making the most of the time that you have in Paris, as we've already discussed, is a tricky business. But there are many locations that are equally as beautiful when lit up at night as during the day. And to prove the point, we've come back into central Paris to Les Grands Boulevards, home to the magnificent Opera House, made so famous firstly by the novelist Gaston Leroux in The Phantom of the Opera in the early 19th century, and secondly by the spectacular musical by Andrew Lloyd Webber based upon the novel in the late 20th century. The building itself was erected in 1872 as part of Napoleon III's vision for a second empire. The Opéra Garnier, as it's known, with its coloured stone and gold statues, must surely have been one of the grandest sights in all of France at the time. Looking like something out of a fairy tale, with its ornate stonework and almost crown-like dome on top, the Opera House is as magical today as ever. And, just as you'd expect from such a lavish building, it's still very much at the heart of Parisian cultural life. And with a capacity that can accommodate well over 2,000 people, should you have an evening to spare for a night at the opera, you definitely won't be disappointed. But if time's against you, it's good to know that you can get just as good a sense of the Opera House's cultural and historical importance from simply spending a few moments in the presence of this stunning building. It's been said that the whole world will pass you by if you sit for long enough at the Café de la Pache, which can be found just across the street from the city's beautiful opera house. It would, however, be a pretty costly business, even if the surroundings are the epitome of elegance. The café opened its doors in 1862 as the restaurant of the Grand Hotel, and with the opera house so close by, there was always a lively atmosphere, with the writers, artists and composers of the day frequently found here. Today, the Café de la Pache offers a wide range of delights right through from coffee and pastries to fine dining and haute cuisine. It is well worth visiting, even if you don't have the time to sit and watch the world in its entirety go by. And very sadly, our time in Paris really is drawing to a close. It does seem only right and proper that we finish our journey here at Les Grands Boulevards. With its fashionable stores, theatres, cinemas and brasseries, this place is the epitome of culture and style, as well as being a wonderful example of everything that makes Paris such a delightful and memorable city. Here you'll find the nation's most important banks rubbing shoulders with street cafes, elegant offices and inviting shops, exuding a vibrancy and energy that you simply would never find in any other city in France, or probably the entire world for that matter. And as our tour around Paris has come to an end, as all good things inevitably do, Le Grand Boulevard provides the perfect conclusion to this cityscape adventure, because it not only shows all the different amenities that Paris has to offer, but also leads tantalisingly off into the distance, suggesting that there is a great deal more to see here, and inviting one and all to return to the streets of Paris again and again. Paris really does have so much to offer everybody who comes here from all over the world. And even though we've squeezed such a lot of the city into this one programme, Paris really does get better the more times you visit. It's a city where on every corner there's a site of some interest. The architecture is second to none. Its culture, although at times extremely refined, is always welcoming. With a history that's as varied as it is colourful, you'll never be at a loss for either enlightenment or entertainment. Paris has quite rightly been dubbed the City of Light, and although this was initially due to the fact that it was one of the first places to adopt street lighting, today there's a greater relevance as Paris now has a world-class reputation for education, as well as being the brightest jewel sparkling in the crown of modern France. The city simply seems to shine at everything that it turns its hand to, from mixing ancient and modern architecture right through to shopping centres and the metro. This is a city that not only embraces all of these challenges and many more besides, it exudes style and charm as it does so. And this can only bode well for the years to come. Paris has survived so much in its past, from bloody revolution to oppressive occupation. Yet it has rebuilt itself every time, hanging on to the best of its heritage and moving forward to face the future proud and unafraid. For Paris and her native people, this is very good news indeed. And for those who come here to visit, it truly makes for an unforgettable experience.